welcome to yet another edition of the Chief Auditor series. The Chief Auditor series is brought to you by Sama, where Dibji and I decided to have a small series for the benefit of posterity to capture the good practices by the leading companies in India so that all this information then resides at one place. We upload these videos on YouTube and other social media so that it is available for all students, all practitioners, anyone who really wants to look at how internal audit can be carried out and what are the best practices. Today we have with us Harshit Baxi, who's a close friend of both Dibji and me, and we've known each other for a pretty long time. So I'll formally introduce Harshit Baxi to all of us. Harshit Baxi is the Global Head Internal Audit and Risk Management in Firstsource Solutions, and he is based out of Mumbai, India. He is a seasoned audit, risk and compliance professional with over 2 decades of experience spanning over banking, insurance and BPM industry verticals. In his current role, he is responsible for driving internal audit and enterprise risk management functions globally across India, US, UK, Philippines geographies. Prior to this, he held leadership roles of CRO, CAE, CCO with Citigroup, Barclays Bank, Tata AIG, and Muzino Bank. While closely working with board, risk/stroke audit committees, executive management, and regulators, he has successfully set up and optimized enterprise risk, audit, and compliance functions in global environment and contributed towards building governance practices. Harshit is an insights discovery practitioner and passionately engages in mentoring and leadership development programs. He is engaged with academic institutions of eminence like IIM Ahmedabad, SP Jain Mumbai, NBI Nepal, MET University, and other institutes as industry expert guest faculty, and also a regular speaker in industry forums such as IIA, RIMS, ICAI, GRC conferences, and of course now in this Sama event. So we have a wonderful personality, global perspectives, right on the table, right here in the comfort of your homes. All over to you, Harshit, and look forward to a very nice, lovely discussion.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Very good morning to Deepji, Sateshji, and everyone. First of all, sincere thanks personally to Deepji and Sama as an enterprise. I think beyond any doubt, it's one of the most important or thoughtful the idea of creating this case as a series, right? I think having this real life practical experience from the industry experts across the segments of an industry, both local and global, is possibly one of the best reference point for anyone in this profession to look up to, irrespective of whether someone who is starting the journey, someone who is kind of wanting to mature it further. So again, very sincere compliments from me personally and the whole fraternity to create very idea and nurture and kind of in this series. And only thing which I would say then specifically for Sateshji, I mean, can't describe, but he's always one single source of inspiration for me and all of us in this industry, right? We always look up to moment we speak about. So I think he's a man who is an audit institution in himself. So it's my pleasure and privilege to be today with both of you and interact. So thanks. Now today, thanks for this opportunity. What I thought when I come across this idea is that, possibly amongst the two alternatives, rather than probably speaking about saying what exactly the org structure maybe in my current role, what are the process or framework or some kind of practices which we follow currently in my organization, probably I took a liberty to take a slight contour and saying that instead of that, let me put myself and share pure experience and learning of my own journey of entering this profession and then how I have gone through. And in that process, what are the key attributes, what are some of the characteristics which I have developed and possibly one can keep back in the mind if one wants to derive a success to become in the journey of CA. So that's one reference point which I have talked. And then obviously supported with 4 or 5 areas and sharing real life best practices in my current role, as well as in the previous organization across the various gamuts of driving into audit. And obviously then quickly sum it up with some of the open-ended kind of food of thought, which everyone can take it back and deliberate upon. So short, simple 3-slide kind of presentation for reference, but that's what I thought. So let me share my screen, and I'm sure now it's visible. Great. So, starting on the discussion, and before that, let me quickly, for a good context and the reference, describe in terms of, and so when it comes to a first source, so obviously some of the points which I'll deliberate further is what derived from my current practice, but it's world's one of the top 5 independent global business process management in the business transformation player, with the significant presence predominantly across the continent in US, UK, with the good service delivery and support capability being derived from India as well as Philippines, right? So currently we do kind of handle Fortune 100, Fortune 500 clients across 3 major business segments. One is BFSI, healthcare and telecom. So been privileged also that while we created some of the practices and models in the frameworks in Firstsource, obviously we also have exposure to learn from a lot of other global players who are our client. So I think very unique role and unique situation where we also have a good opportunity to learn from our own client who are obviously having a much more even the best practices, very mature practices. So that actually has given us a good exposure. Now, with keeping that as a background, obviously the views which I'll be putting across are purely my personal views, and it's not necessarily subscribed by the organization. So what I thought of is that to begin with, I'll kind of go through my own journey and share my experience and learning. Then I'll share some of the best practices across 4 or 5 areas of internal audit, and possibly all these could be an opportunity to delve further for every one of us. And then we'll leave with some kind of an open-ended food for thought. So, when I have started my journey, and so could be the case with many of us in audit profession, technically, if you look at it in terms of a broader value chain, typically there are 3 layers, and which may be true for any other role, but one aspire to start in the beginning with something where the nomenclature may be different, but it's kind of a starting point as a team member in a well-functioning, well-oiled mechanism of an audit executive. If you continue to be passionate and basically build your career vertically in the audit profession itself, then technically you will start getting into another middle layer in the value pyramid, which is your lead auditor role. And obviously then eventually at some point of time, aspirationally, you can be a chief audit executive, chief internal auditor, head of internal audit, whichever way you prescribe to. So from an aspirational point of view, when you enter this field, yeah, you are basically struggling with kind of a navigation compass, with the multiple directions are open in terms of whether I wanted to learn for a few months or few years in internal audit, then possibly can I go back into some other functions like maybe logical engineering to finance, maybe some other kind of governance function like risk and compliance, or altogether go back to business and operation. There are multiple directional, and that's a typical sweet dilemma which all of us face. And then many of us, not all of us, but rightfully then we passionately decide that eventually I wanted to grow vertically with my eventual aim, where I wanted to hit over a time to become a CAE. Now, if that's what is an aspiration and that I could correlate is my own journey. Now, if that's what's the value chain? And when I talk about the value chain, I'll focus more on the attributes, right? And each attribute in itself is a discipline itself, which one can kind of building up. It's a combination of 2 things. One is what's your functional or so-called technical competencies and how you can build it up. And alongside, what are your interpersonal skills and competencies? Because eventually you need both. But the weightage of both, wherein so both could keep varying, depends upon your specific situation or specific role. To begin with, as a journey, what are the 2 critical attributes needed is obviously you need to have a technical competence to do a basic justice to adjust into this field. And where I've seen many of the young aspirants possibly make a mistake when it comes to technical competence, yes, it's a qualification, it's a degree. And purely in the context of India, if I have to draw a line, chartered accountancy is one of the most logically nearby connected kind of an educational qualification, which makes you at least a beginner's point of view technically qualified. If I draw a global context, possibly in addition to CA, right? There are CPA, CMA, and other equivalent kind of an qualification which gives you a basic fundamental technical competence. But again, in my perspective, one of the interesting things which I have experienced myself, and I have seen a lot of success story when it comes to technical competence, it's not necessarily only educational qualification, but there are, even if you have a good band and understanding of the various specific businesses or some segment of the business, it is as good as having a good technical competence, right? And then you can enter into profession with that technical competence also. And gradually, if you are passionate, you can build with some of the example like your CIA and those kind of qualifications, which you can still add on and build you can absolutely be qualified to become an auditor by profession, by choice. So only limited point which I am trying to kind of draw my own experience that, good to have a fundamental educational qualification, but even if you do not have, don't take that as a limitation, but right, you can still have a business understanding, good broader kind of an industry segment perspective. Even that's a valuable and important technical qualification. On a slightly individual slide, what you basically essentially need is an eye for detail. Now one can describe eye for details in a many form, many shape and size, but fundamentally you need to be inquisitive by nature as an individual. Fundamentally, you need to be always looking at the things from the perspective of why, how, what, and these are the kind of a more common nomenclature associated. But as long as you have band and eye for details, technically it's a fundamental characteristic which one needs to develop in the beginning stage of your audit career. Once you start building this competency and do your own assessment and you develop the interest, then technically you also parallelly need some kind of an interpersonal skill, is a team player, right? And why it's extremely important in the function of an audit that, there are people who by nature, by personality, if you are very introvert, if your choices or your inclination is more towards performing the kind of an individual contributor or solo role, then my advice is that at some point of time, in terms of growing it vertically, probably that's not the best fit, because audit is a one function where I would definitely see a lot of success coming if you are a good team player. And that's an essential attribute which at least I would definitely prescribe. And these are not something which are born quality. One can be consciously aware and keep develop this, right? So even if someone possibly perceiving that self is may not be, one can always develop. But yeah, important to develop the personality where you are able to adjust and work well in a team perspective within the audit team, as well as eventually as we move up the value chain within the ecosystem. So that's both the perspective when I say team player. And another important thing which is extremely important, critical from an audit perspective, is an objectivity. And why I say objectivity, this is in one area where every single piece of information on table will have a multiple views, right? And that's where you will naturally, as a human being, will have your own biases. And obviously there are some preferences, there are likes, there are some predetermined notions. Eventually, your success as an auditor will derive only from the point of your ability to look at everything from the point of objectivity, right? What's the underlying information? What are the associated facts? And in the context of the issue or the broader objective which we all are working together, respecting every other counter view, as well as finally, how do you look at and evaluate purely from objective perspective and bringing your subjectivity element somewhere aside. So I think as an interpersonal skill, your ability to look at the things objectively is something which becomes a critical role. And I would definitely say that at least has helped me personally a lot in terms of eventually building the career, right? Once you start playing and building these competencies in a different kind of a mindset, and then eventually once you start moving up to the kind of a middle level role, what then basically prescribes is primarily a couple of other areas, which is your basically subject matter expertise capability. Now this I correlate with your technical competencies. Once you have a technical competency, either towards as a born auditor, it could be either towards a business subject matter expert, it could be towards some of the very specific skill driven expert like technology auditor, so on and so forth. But eventually you need to build and demonstrate a much wider, broader so-called subject matter expertise. So when I say subject matter expertise, your ability to lead a good audit team will largely depend upon your ability to know the audits and the nuances, to know the business, to know the kind of a product perspective, to know the people management. And that's where I would say that, your subject matter expertise becomes all the more critical, and one need to start kind of a nurturing. For the reason that as a lead auditor, your ability to sit across the table and also discuss various matter, convince the kind of an audit related issues with your counterparts become largely depend upon other people also start perceiving you to be subject matter expert. If you are not, then possibly it may become a bottleneck at some point of time in your own growth further. So that's what when I mean about the subject matter expertise capability. And obviously your then technically what comes is your on a slightly softer side is while managing the people, but primarily your stakeholder engagement, right? And as a middle level, as a lead auditor, what is important that while you continue to successfully manage your own people, which is your own team, this is where your critical juncture will kick in the sense your ability to understand and manage all the stakeholder. And when I say stakeholder, it is going beyond your audit, going beyond your executive management, but every stakeholder in terms of including your regulators, your board members, your various committee perspective, including even some of the key customer, third party, and that's an ecosystem kind of. And once you start understanding and have create a kind of an engagement with the stakeholder, that's an extremely important, because if you are not able to focus and nurture on this skill, possibly again it may become a bottleneck in terms of your own growth further. And my own success in my own mantra derived in terms of how I have been able to do it is only with one universal mantra, is that your ability to build a trustworthy relationship, right? And when it takes a time. These are the things which doesn't happen overnight, but once you develop all other peripheral things in terms of technical competence, your ability to deliver, your ability to look at the things from objective perspective, then obviously your ability to successfully manage the stakeholder will derive from your trustworthy relationship, and that's where you need to really invest in terms of and let people see you as a trustworthy individual, for the reason that these are the roles where there are possibility of what people perceive you, that someone who can create a damage. And that's what I think in a relationship building comes usually in the way as a bottleneck to your audit fraternity, where people may be seeing the underlying matter as a fact, but they may not have a trust with you that how it's been perceived, how it may be kind of viewed, how it may be reported further. And that's where you need to kind of have a very trustworthy relationship, where people understand your objective, where people perceive you not as a police, but someone who is more of an internal helping hand, who can help you collectively to solve some of the kind of an issue, right? So once you develop this kind of an peripheral skills, and then eventually you move towards your journey towards chief audit executive, essentially what comes into picture is to take a level further. You need to have absolute strategic thinking process. And while these are more of a fancy word, but in reality, when I say the strategic thinking, what it really means is that your ability to look at the audit and connect it with the broader organizational priority. What are the important things from organizational objective? How is organization's vision and mission? What are some of the challenges? What are the important risks which organization facing? And then connecting and designing, deliberating, bringing the agility and delivering your own audit function. That's where I would say that, you need to have that absolutely bend of mind towards the strategic thinking to look beyond. And that's where when I say the ecosystem perspective, if one has to become a successful CAE, you need to have a complete ecosystem perspective. And that's the third level of a further enhancement. You start from your team, take it up to a broader stakeholder engagement, which still in the context of our organization, But then you move one level up. When I say ecosystem view, is to also have a clear view about the broader economic perspective, from a policy perspective, from the point of view of how your competitive landscape is evolving, what are the kind of an emerging scenario which are going to come up, and then accordingly kind of an design and deliver and kind of propagate your audit, so that it becomes even the reason important perspective from ecosystem view point of view is that even if you have a team perspective, even if you have an organizational perspective, somewhere it is still an inside out kind of a view, right? Where the focus is necessarily look at what I have as a direct reference point as an organization, and then kind of deliver the function. What is extremely important is also to parallelly start looking at the outside in perspective. And I think it's one of the very, very value additive kind of a dimension which auditor or as a chief auditor you need to develop, because that's where I am seeing that from management or your own internal stakeholder perspective, it's a very value additive kind of a proposition. Having done that, then primarily to other thing which is extremely important for you to even continue to become a kind of a reference point as a very successful chief internal auditor. One is you need to have a credible leader, right? And when I say credible leader or leadership credibility, it's something which comes with a lot of kind of an authority along with the accountability. It also your ability to develop a trustworthy relationship with the people, your ability to be perceived as someone who is a more of a solution provider, and there is a lot of credibility in the sense that he is a mature individual who works cohesively with all stakeholders in the system, and eventually towards the common objective, that how collectively this individual can kind of add a value in a broader organizational perspective. And I firmly believe that one of the key characteristic, or one need to keep it in mind, develop, is that you eventually need to be a cultural influencer. And when I say why it is extremely important, that as an audit leader, many of the things when you look at some of the issues, its resolution is largely linked towards the fundamentally what is the underlying culture of an organization. And so while those individual specific instances, the issues, the risks are getting addressed, eventually everyone believes that fundamentally some of the things can be fundamentally solved unless we influence the culture. And in that perspective, I think CAE fundamentally as a role, who is kind of an understanding or expected to understand the business world, who is the individual who is perceived or who is expected to be connected well with everyone in the organization from a leadership perspective, I think has a unique kind of an space where one can be a cultural influencer, right? And I think that's where I think as a chief auditor, you need to consciously work towards start influencing company's culture, in order to ensure that whatever work is done eventually becomes sustainable and doesn't remain a point in time or kind of one instance driven ramification or project driven verification. But when everyone talks about the kind of sustainability, and if as a chief auditor, you're one of the key hidden objective, or I would say, is that whatever governance environment or governance practices which is prevailing in organization and how it is getting strengthened, that has to be sustainable. And the best way to make it sustainable is start influencing the culture, start from across the spectrum of an organization, right? So I think, again, what I captured is what I thought is important attributes, how these attributes play around at a different kind of point in time in your career, and as an overall summative, as a package, if one can keep that something in the back in mind, possibly it can be extremely useful to help you growing up yourself in that value pyramid of journey of becoming CAE. Now, with that sharing a perspective, let me go to the second point of reference that, in Firstsource today, as well as in my previous stints, what are some of the best practices which we have demonstrated across the various value parameters within the internal audit, right? And obviously, these are something which are best practices. The reason I believe that it added a lot of value. Obviously, it can be varied from a point in time, or it can be from organization to organization, but how it helped. So I share one practice across each of these 4 domains and try to kind of say why we did it, what were the challenges which got addressed through this, and possibly if it can be helpful to anyone in the future. Now, one of the pillars from audit is basically essentially it's a governance function, right? And I have been that's a point of debate all along my career, and I have seen a failure as a success on both the side. But eventually at some point of time, I have convinced myself, and I have been one of the vocal that according to me, independence is a myth. It's a state of mind. Now, when I say independent, it's largely your ability to independently have your view, your ability to design, implement, and your ability to, if you are convinced, the rightfully ability to reach out and report to your important stakeholder. When it comes to execution, you should not make the mistake of being independent, but you need to be extremely working in collaborative manner with all the stakeholder in terms of taking people along and execute your plan. So in that context, the reason why I'm sharing is that, when it comes to independence, sometimes as an auditor, when you start your journey and moving towards the CAE pyramid, sometimes you may go overboard in the emphasis of an independence, but in that process, you are losing the whole essence of eventually. And that's where what I say that eventually integrated governance, where various so-called lines of defenses are working together. Now, when we came across this kind of a challenge, and one of the things that, with all the due respect to these lines of defense model, but if you look at it in a totality, even when you say lines of defense, essentially the line as a mathematical figure is essentially something which is like independent to each other, right? Which is what is one of the philosophy which is propagated. So just for a perspective of bringing out altogether new dimension, when we say integrated governance in one of the organization, what we have developed is a circle of defense. When I say circle of defense, it's like where auditor and I took a lead that whatever your first line of defense is, second line of defense is, third line of defense, without disturbing the structure, what exactly are their key objective, what are their input, what are the output, simple kind of a process orientation, and then eventually clubbing all of them together to explore the two fundamental objectives. What are the areas of an overlap? A classical challenge or classical dilemma with most of the organization face that, look, in the order to have a kind of a classical 3 lines of defense model and having a very stronger governance, eventually the ground reality, while all of the functions are doing their bits and pieces, in totality, there are a lot many overlap, there are a lot many information crossroads, there are a lot many kind of multiple stakeholder engagement. So can we have some kind of a unified model? And that's where I think we have developed something which is called circle of defense. Circle is just a nomenclature, but it's essentially that everything is well connected. End of the day, and that's what is we try to depict it through circle. We have come out with the model that where some kind of a uniform approach where these various control activity and control functions discharge that responsibility. And while we continue to do so, at least from a reporting and other cross leverage perspective, there is a commonality. So even if suppose the outcome of an audit, outcome of the risk, outcome of a compliance function, outcome of a first line of defense, somewhere is there a one common platform where everything can be seen, where interconnectivity can be established. If there are areas of pure overlap, then can you have a one uniform approach to kind of an address that with the one uniform definition where every other control function can also leverage. So it's a philosophy in itself. What it helps not only to explore the efficiency but from a perception perspective, it kind of really changed the game that here is kind of a model which is absolutely collaborative in model. Here is a model where every stakeholder is engaged, they are kind of involved, their views matter, and it's eventually helping each other. So from even that perspective, kind of, and I have seen a lot of success when we kind of, while continue to have a structure as it is without disturbing the structure. From philosophy and framework perspective, everyone is collaborated, and where CAE has taken a lead to kind of do it. This could be done provided that as a CAE, as at your individual level, and then at a functional philosophic level, you were first came out with that mental block of being independent, right? And that's what when I say that, if you are kind of and continue to be still independent, but when it comes to internal delivery, if you go towards more collaborative approach, it's one of the kind of a good success story, which at least I have seen. Moving to a second pillar within the overall audit life cycle is a delivery. Now, this is again, when I say delivery is all of us currently may not be applicable in the sense, but at least the global organizations. right? Where when it comes to as a CAE, your delivery is largely to ensure that whatever is your organizational context with respect to audit, in terms of, and are you able to deliver in a timely manner, in a quality manner, are you able to satisfy the kind of an expectation of the key stakeholder? Likewise, what is the new trend which has emerged, and maybe it may be unique to my role of or virtue of being most of the time in a global organization. If you expand the horizon and include a customer's perspective, which usually is missing in an audit, today I can see that if you focus on the next 5 year, next 10 year, depends upon your organization, but it's a trend within the audit fraternity, like software as a service or business process as a service, audit as a service as a model is going to take a phenomenally big jump in a time to come. And probably we being into this specific industry statement, we learn a lot from that as a product offering or service offering. And eventually today within the construct, we're able to develop the model and provide a service with another completely different team as a product or service where you can generate even the revenue for your client. But most importantly, from your organization perspective, and if you are in a global organization, I would sincerely say to keep this kind of one success story in mind, that within the organization, today India is going to be considered as a hub in every perspective. So even if while you are responsible to deliver as an audit program or chief audit executive responsible for India, you need to basically first yourself get acquainted, convince, and start reaching out your global stakeholder that within the global audit delivery, what more can be done out of India. And that's a fantastic growth opportunity for audit profession itself. And as a model, rather than to reinvent anything, I would strongly, and since we were into that industry and we were offering maybe software as a service, product as a service as a ready-made model, it's a some model from a business perspective readily available. So if you wanted to really replicate, I would urge CAEs to look at that as a model and start thinking, can within my global organization, can I think of developing something where audit as a service, right? Maybe within to organization, but consolidating. The couple of big advantage and challenge, if you look at it, what organization face with respect to audit, and if you are a global across the geography, standardization of your practices, uniform understanding, right? Right utilization of your audit related assets, which is more from financial sense of view. And that's where audit as a service model is going to eventually extremely beneficial to address and help. The reason why I am seeing as a good practice, we all as a chief auditor face what I call is a phenomena called value fatigue. When I say value fatigue, all of us are always under question that now what next? How are you able to add more value? And this is an area where I think, while doing a full justice in every perspective to delivering audit, if you have to do more, this is one area where you can go proactively and put across a proposition. I'm sure most of the organizations today are becoming very matured in terms of exploring, and if this kind of an opportunity get clicks, it's a success story in itself. The third pillar within the broader audit is a communication, right? And I think less we can have an entire full day kind of a workshop deriving around communication. But I thought that two things which I have seen. And if you go back and look at the communication piece of various audit related communications, which start from life cycle of audit planning, maybe your opening letters, maybe your audit engagement, even audit report, your various reports to executive management, to your audit committee, various stakeholder into regulator. Most of them currently fundamentally are designed through a push strategy of communication, right? And when I say push strategy, it's something which auditor designs. Auditor decides at what point in time, in which form, in which platform you wanted to communicate and engage with the person. I would say that how we have changed that and derived that, instead of that, logically, one can move to the pull strategy where you can derive a platform where all information in a different form, shape, and size is available. And any stakeholder at any point of time want just on the click of button on tab, absolutely customization can keep looking at the time when they are needed that information. So practically all of us kind of in debate when I am basically releasing report or I am sending a meeting invite for, say, for example, particular picture of the issue, probably at that point of time, the other senior resource is having an absolute different set of priority. And usually what we face is that needing an absolute attention when we need. But instead of that, if information can be made available, let people derive it when they want it. Because my practical understanding is that instead of basically having a 1 hour discussion of going line by line to entire report, when a business head facing a real-time issue and want a specific 1 or 2 information, if the platform is created and that person and selfly kind of generate those information very crisp, it's a good communication. Today, I think we have seen, and most of the organization have seen success because of technological help, which possibly was not there 5 years or 10 years down the line. But you have very simple, effective use of technology, very good kind of data reporting, data visualization tools are very fantastically easy to customize, available. You can easily deploy and convert your all communication into very interesting, very pictorial, colorful drafts, graphical given, but with the punch and crisp message. So that's a one obviously success story or best practice which we have developed. Last pillar for the success of audit, without irrespective of your best of the governance framework, you can have a best of the delivery model, one can have a best of the communication, but end of the day, everything converts to people, right? It's people is eventually will going to derive the whole success of the audit delivery. And that's where, one of the, and I would definitely wanted to make a reference to cricket, because I know that Satishji is like something which is one common topic, cricket. And one of the things, if you look back, right, today IPL is going on. Everyone is inclined as a natural philosophy to build a team, which all of us call as a Dream 11 team. When I say Dream 11 team, conceptually, what exactly it means that I am trying to pick up best of the batsmen, best of the ballers, best of the wicket keepers, best of the fielders, and everyone put together. So 11 star top performer together becomes one good team, but still it defeats the purpose, right? At some point of time. From an audit point of view, looking at the peculiar nuances where we are saying that we need some kind of a mixed skill set of coming from multiple dimensions. You need a people who are born auditor qualified and having an expertise in the audit philosophy framework. You also need people who are kind of a knowing business well. You need people who are kind of an expert in a particular skill about say digital skill or technology skill. You also need in a large organization which is spanning across the geography, you also need within the audit team people who could be a good project management and execution kind of a skill, those kind of. So what we do is something which is just a nomenclature, but top flight teams. So essentially it's a team where you are basically very clearly identifying the strength of each member, helping them to kind of assign with the exact task where they can leverage their strength at the maximum, but at the same time focusing on their relative not strength, I would not say weakness, but and continuously nurture them with the training development kind of an intervention, which could be either functional, which could be technical, which could be interpersonal, so that eventually all of us, so it's essentially 1 + 1 becomes 3. Or maybe 4 or maybe 5, and not necessarily. Now, when we did that very consciously developed model, right? It's a scientific model which we have built up. And what we have come out with the essential 6 kind of characteristic which ideally need to be there. And those characteristics can vary from model to model, from organization to organization. But today, if we have to come across and judge an individual, start from initial joining stage to a career development stage, while it's important to look at and evaluate from their educational qualification, past experience, but we apply one or combination of these 6 skills or attributes, which I would say. One is empowerment. Audit is a one function where end of the day there is some kind of an decision making process which is critical. And when I say decision making process, obviously it's a part and parcel of every individual role, but here is a slightly unique where you are basically always having a multiple views on table, and still without actually practicing the so-called authoritative aspect in nature, you still have to take people along, you have to stick people kind of enforce or execute your thing. And that's what I think right way is that as a chief audit executive, you need to start at right stage empowering your own people in terms of okay, use your own objectivity, use your own judgment. We are empowering you because your view, within the audit team, the view of a lead auditor may likely to vary from the chief audit executive likewise, but empower people and encourage that practice. That's the one thing. Second thing is, again, extremely important principle of shared responsibility. And even from a people perspective, wanted to build a successful career, you need to really understand very clearly that, what is the principle of shared responsibility, where multiple stakeholder eventually has a responsibility towards meeting one common objective. That could be a common objective of audit team. That could be common objective of an organization as a whole. So people who are conscious and are able to demonstrate this kind of a skill, I have seen that they derive a larger success. Third, which we have spoken about, the trust, right? If you are not a trustworthy person, possibly that's not the space to be around. Diversity, extremely important. People speak about diversity, and that sometimes is also a fashionable statement when it comes to kind of in your recruitment practices. But it doesn't stop at recruitment practices in terms of in your maybe gender diversity, regional diversity, ethical diversity. In a ground reality and day to day, when I speak about diversity and connect it with the audit, it's your ability to kind of respect each diverse perspective, diverse view, diverse thought process, diverse mechanism to kind of deliver the thing. And that's where you need to build and nurture the sense of diversity in the team. I think stability is an extremely important point, and that's where I've seen in my own practical experience, current as well as many of the organizations, that audit is one area where technically I will say that maybe 2 cycle or 3 cycle is the time when everyone start kind of hitting that monotony, right? Because you have done that audit, maybe in the second cycle you have done something which is new. Maybe after 3 cycle is practically, as an auditor, you have done almost everything is a landscape, and that's where you start hitting monotony. And that eventually, if you do not have a good, strong people practices, particularly with respect to your career development, you start seeing a lot of churning. And audit is one area where I would definitely say that stability makes a lot of difference versus a very, very, very high kind of churning. And that's where I'm saying that on how to encourage and address and cultivate that and stability factor within the audit team. It can be by virtue of offering someone horizontal growth. It could be by virtue of learning and development opportunity. It could be by virtue of vertical growth, but eventually you need to ensure a stability. And last is a networking, which is primarily from the point of view of your ability to build a broad relationship. So eventually you need to nurture that soft skill of ability to develop good networking. So again, when it comes to a people, there is no one size fits all, but this is what eventually out of a lot of learning, we kind of gone back in developing our team, where we are clearly seeing kind of, all of them individually or together is eventually resulting into one high performing, self-motivated kind of and well cohesive team, which I think is a success in itself in order to deliver a good audit outcome. So these are the kind of, I thought purely from my experiential learning, what are the 4 different pillars within the overall CA, and what are the, at least one example of something which worked very well as a success and how it helped various organizations to kind of address a specific challenge. So with that, I just came to a very last 1 minute of maybe some of the open-ended thought. Which is the one thing that, first is looking for yourself. And it's a time where each CAE, and I have been asking that question to myself, that are you ready for your personal transformation, right? Everyone is today talking about that, we need to transform our audit function, but that can happen provided only and only if you as an CAE are ready mentally and every perspective to transform yourself. The definition of transformation could be anything, but your ability to first accept that things are getting changed. Things are getting changed much faster than what you are believing. And in order to then continue to be first staying relevant, and once you become relevant, then also become a very, very high value additive stakeholder within the overall scheme of things. What are the areas in which you are ready to transform yourself by virtue of maybe adding digital skill, maybe by expanding your horizon, maybe by adding to some kind of advanced management practices, whichever way. But you need to understand your own blind spot, work on that consciously and transform yourself. If as a CAE, possibly today you are not thinking and spending some quality time in that aspect, maybe it's a matter of time when you can become irrelevant in a time to come. So that's the one thought which I would leave. Second is primarily, is CAE equipped And even CA should aspire to become a CX role, very open-ended kind of, and it's a point of debate which most of the CA kept discussing. Then and in an overall scenario, I think today we have a very handful of, or maybe none kind of an example where eventually CAU has become CEO. Yes, there are very inspirational examples in that space also. But keeping that aside, one of the thing that if you are basically talking about your own personal growth and aspirational aspects, possibly one closest thing is maybe CFO, from the perspective of you being perceived to be more closer to finance or maybe chartered accountant. But other than that, there are examples where CAE also, and I would believe that, because of your depth of knowledge about business, about the ecosystem, your ability to have a strategic thinking, why not? CAE can also become marketing officer, CAE can also become product officer. There are examples where CAE is gone as a business head and perform very well. But those are the kind of various virtues. Sometimes I would say that, CAE possibly have some kind of a stigma of not expanding the horizon and thinking other CX role, but that could be big value additive to oneself, as well as that could be big value additive to organization also. So why not? To think about those opportunities. And the last, which is again common, which is what exactly today's forum I am kind of, very passionate about, and I would urge all CAU that, it's time to be very proactive. While all institutional mechanisms are there, you have ICI, you have WIRC, you have IIA, there are a variety of bodies, standards, everything will remain. Finally, it's an CA individually and then collectively as a fraternity, you need to be proactive and start influencing, sharing the knowledge, best practices. They have to kind of make an every opportunity to contribute towards the entire audit as a profession and then as a fraternity, because we have that additional undefined, non-goal oriented, maybe sometimes perceived to be non-rewarding role to play, which is more towards social objective, right? Which is more toward communicating objective. You're organizing, talking about ESG. What is my ESG goal? I think as a CA, our ESG goal is to basically explore exactly this kind of forum, become a torchbearer, do not wait, but kind of passionately go back and help entire fraternity and particularly young generation to make them understand, convince, influence, and make them kind of an audit as an attractive proposition to build. I think individually to start with and collectively we all of us do that. That's one of the fantastic contributions of giving back to the profession, which has given us that opportunity to grow. So that is my deliberation today, and I'll just take a stop and open to a further set of conversation. Thank you.
With this food for thought, I think we'll have to skip lunch. Huh?
Yeah, this has been, this has been excellent presentation, and I've been carefully listening along with Satish, to the things you said. Now, one thing I'm going to do after this present workshop is, after this deliberation is, I'm going to take printout of those 2 slides, laminate it, and I'm going to showcase it to every internal auditor I meet. Because for the past 20 years, Harshit, I've been speaking of 2 things. One is, why can't India become the hub for delivering internal audit services around the world, which has clearly come out in the journey of, CAE. You have talked about the attributes, and then you have talked about the deliverables in the second slide, audit as a service, etc. So it is coming out clearly, and it is happening in the last 5-7 years. We are seeing more and more internal auditors in India delivering internal audit services to around the world. So these 2 slides, set the tone, what should be done and how it should be developed. The second part is your aspiration to be aspiration of a Chief Internal Auditor to be a CEO. Why not? So again, which has come out from the deliberation today. But my question to you is, in the first slide, when we talked about journey of a CAE, you have put everything, write down all the attributes. Could you just throw more light on 2 attributes? Very important. That all the attributes are important, but 2 things: trust building and credible leader. So how do you distinguish between them? Because I see a little overlap also in that. So, how will you distinguish between trust building and credible leader? Those 2 attributes, which are very important to, journey of a CAE.
Excellent. Yeah, true. It's a little bit of a fine line, but the way I have seen a clear distinction between what I call trust building and when I say credibility, trust building is more of an interpersonal. So it's basically a more one-on-one relationship, right? So you as an auditor, technically in the sense of an audit, basically come across multiple set of an stakeholder and individual, and my own experience, you are able to build a very trustworthy relationship with one individual, which may not be the case with other relationship. So if I draw a map and think there are one too many relationship, it's a one single hub where I am as in hub and there are multiple scope. All the spokes may or may not be a real trustworthy relationship. When I say credibility leader is kind of taking a one step ahead and saying, if you are a credible leader, you are basically someone who is beyond one individual relationship. So your ability to still kind of go along with those all relationships which are at a different level of maturity, but end of the day, you are very credibly still able to manage those. You are a credible leader if you are provided to have a relationship which is not really trustworthy in a real sense, but still it doesn't come in your way in delivering your organizational objective. So again, in a nut bolt, that's where I'm seeing that credibility is more of a overall umbrella level pursuit where you are being seen objectively by other stakeholders. Your trustworthy relationship is more of a one-on-one individual aspects of the same thing in a different context.
Great, great.
So you, Harshit, were a wonderful presentation, no doubt about it. I was, I thought I'd not take down notes because today Dibji is summarizing it, but you said so many things and I started noting them down. You used the word value fatigue, okay? And that's something which is new. I had heard about audit fatigue, but value fatigue has come to me also something very new. And that's why I liked your presentation because it was not only targeted for students, but it was targeted for the entire community. What exactly you meant by value fatigue?
Sure. No, value fatigue, when I said, while your defined objectives, vision, mission, everything is fine. End of the day, all of us kind of struggle with that. One is our own aspirational thing, that how do we add more value? But more importantly, all the stakeholder with the so fast changing dynamic kind of scenario do expect more and more value coming out of it, right? Now, one thing which is misunderstanding. So once you start basically meeting your objective, that's where it starts translating that, in the next time, what more you can add, right? Now, value, when I say, and that's where you come across a challenge that if you are not kind of adding onto that, it can become a value fatigue. Now, when I say value fatigue, one of the things which most of the people perceive in a financial sense, right? Saying, what's the kind of dollar value which you have been able to add? What is the dollar value which you've been able to save, and those kind of stuff. When I say real value fatigue is that, and how one can address is that possibly there are 3 layers of a journey of an audit function, and each of these layer basically you encounter. So it depends upon your maturity model. In initial stage of your internal audit, you are technically in the compliance mode where your focus is basically just to do a bare minimum, to do everything which helps organization to kind of do a regulatory checkbox in perspective. And if you are in that stage, that's obviously there is a value fatigue which you are going to add, and that's where you can start working on. So in my own example, say for example, when I talk about those circle of defense and those model, that's somewhere is where you start doing an integration phase. So first is kind of in compliance phase. And the way you can add value by removing the value fatigue is by moving your one level up to kind of an integration phase. If you, in terms of maturity, largely around that, that's where some of the pointers or best practices related to audit as a service and those kind of an advanced communication model, where you are adding a value maybe which is in a non-financial sense, but still kind of it keeps you energized. It keeps stakeholders seeing more coming out of the same function, the same team. So that's what I'm saying. That's a value fatigue, and what we can do in a different phase depends upon your maturity cycle to add value.
I think when we talked about the aspirations for a CEO in the initial journey, which you talked about, you have an aspiration for a CAE. So I think the seeds for being a CEO would be, the aspiration goal would be set at the beginning itself, not at the end. What's your take on that? If somebody sets a goal for being a CEO, would their life cycle be different, or how would it work out?
Yeah, sure. No, I think someone sets up a role of CEO, which I think is a paramount, and everyone aspire to be CEO. Why not? And everyone should. I would say that, somewhere in that life cycle, one should also take up the role which are kind of in likes of CAE or maybe some governance role. That definitely helps you to eventually become a more successful CEO. So that's why I would say journey, that in the journey may not be in the initial stage, but somewhere in the middle stage, one should have this kind of indirect exposure also, so that as a CEO, eventually your ability to look at the thing purely from governance angle, from governance perspective also comes very really handy. So that's the only difference I would kind of aspire. Second thing, if you are basically from a very initial stage of an aspiration to eventually move to a CEO journey, your some of the attributes and focus in terms of your eventual out-oriented customer centricity, your kind of when I say that your ecosystem perspective, those are the attributes which kicks in a pretty early stage of your versus maybe those are the attributes which typically comes up in a little later stage of your CAE career. So those are the couple of differences which I can definitely think of.
One last question from my side, Harshit. You talked about auditor being a cultural influencer, which is again a very nice terminology. Now, considering your vast coverage, you cover so many countries. What part does culture play in handling audits, especially outside the country where the cultures are different?
True. So there are 2-3 things. I mean, one easier thing which most of the organizations do is that if you really wanted to influence the culture and develop the sense of an accountability, develop the sense of an ownership where every individual in organization up to the last mile also understand, they say that, look, we have a responsibility to do the things in a controlled manner. We have a responsibility to manage the risk. Probably easier first thing is to start linking it with your own KRAs in the goal, right? And today it's a fact that maybe even the best of the organization possibly may not have that formal goal associated with your way you manage the risk or way you exercise the control across the organization. Possibly people begin the journey by keeping it with some maybe executive management and start going down. That's the one thing. Second thing is, from a cultural perspective, is the continuous engagement and sustained communication. And that's a medium or a tool through which start influencing the culture. So say, for example, where we have exercised that, as an auditor, you are in a unique role and position to look at a lot of things in an early stage, a lot of things where could be a control failure, which are limited to a one particular part of business. But then is it really transpired successfully with the real speed across the organization? So what we have done while doing an audit, we took an extra step and we started conducting say workshops, which are like what is likely to go wrong or what can go wrong, kind of a real session where audit team, maybe along with the rest team, goes and kind of sits with the junior set of people across the business, understand and say, look, this is what something which I think is going wrong somewhere. It can happen in your area also. Or what you think can go wrong in your area, which we can proactively. So I think another way of influencing culture is through taking one extra step and getting engaged with the people, because auditor typically are not bound to or do not engage too much at the ground level, right? By virtue of performing that audit in itself on a sustained basis. So that's the second way of culture. Second thing is that today, how many organizations, if you and we did that exercise, right, in the different contexts, but at the group level, that if you look at some of the organizational scan and look at their value, simple thing to start with, in those values, are you able to ascribe to a one or maybe multiple values which are straightway related to your either risk capability, your risk mitigation, your control exercise? And when I say that, as an auditor, so that's when you have to start basically influence the culture. Do we have a right kind of a value system, and then behavioral aspects which are defined. So say, for example, in one of our organizations, as an CAE, you kind of understood, and you said that, we are not as an auditor, as a risk manager, you are not kind of wanting to have a risk averse culture. But we would like people to be consciously understand the risk and understand the importance of an audit and control environment. So then eventually over a period of time, maybe your risk taking ability itself has been added as one of the core value in the value system itself. Now, if that's the case, then eventually it's going to help influencing every individual on the organization. So there are multiple those dimensions which I can say where CAE can become a cultural influencer.
Brilliant.
I think great, really great, Harshit. Time to wrap up. I was listening to you, I was remembering all the days when I used to go out and also teach at IIMs, and it is like a professor telling us, it is so nice to hear the blocks which you said and the slides which you showed. It is like, a very mature, strong leader, a professor who is coming out and teaching you so nicely, showing you the path. So that is, I can conclude that, you're showing the path to the CAEs, to the internal audit fraternity, how to do internal auditing for the world. Not only, of course, do it very well here in this country, but also do it for the rest of the world. So I think that's the dream, and also to grow in and have an aspiration to grow, to really be at the top. And why not? So I think I'll just try to sum up, because whatever you said in those 2 slides was a conclusion. So I have to pick out certain things and talk about it, So I think what I can say is that you talked about journey of the CAE attributes. So very important. One is aspirational point of view. The technical competence, eye for details. You talked about objectivity, team player. You talked about people management, SME capabilities, trust building, stakeholder engagement, ecosystem perspective, strategic thinking, cultural leader, credible leader. So, all the things, all these attributes which will make a great internal auditor, which will make a great internal team, I would say, because if the team can imbibe that, then we can look at these attributes being imbibed by that ecosystem of the team, the internal audit team per se. And then we talked about, the best practices. And what I liked about the CAE best practices is you talked about areas of opportunities. These 3 words, this is a huge area of opportunity for the internal auditors, which is governance, delivery, communication, and people. So you put that into 4 boxes very nicely and talked about governance, the circle of defense. Again, what came out very clearly was independence is a state of mind. Now, I've been speaking about that for the past 20 years, because it is not that you will not go and do implementation along with the stakeholder. You should not, how do I choose my words correctly? You should not take the standard and say, I'm not going to implement, because I am independent. I'm just going to suggest whatever it takes to make things happen, add value to the organization, to be right up there. So independence, again, a state of mind. Go out and make your SOPs, go out and help implementation, because that is required, if it is required. So, coming out clearly, be part of the governance. That will not only help the internal audit function, it will help the function grow, it will deliver better value, and also meet the aspirational goal of the internal auditor. So, you talked about governance, then you talked about delivery, audit as a service. Again, look at the global delivery model, look at what they require. Even if you're delivering in India, look at what they require. What are the requirements? What are their frameworks? How do you fit things into, how they speak the same language, and audit as a service. So deliver that service, you'll be value add and you'll grow. Communication, shift from push to pull strategy. Again, great thought. On tap, customizable, real time, and crisp communication. When I'm hearing all this, I even think of, some places where the internal audit has gone to a shop floor, seen something, just captured in on a 2-minute video, shown it to the management, and that's an internal audit report. That's it, because it has added tremendous value. So, communication and people, top flight teams and not dream 11s. So you talked about, consistency, empowerment, shared responsibility, trust, diversity, stability, and networking. So, and it doesn't come easy, because, people is a variable which is very difficult to nurture and grow. All other variables can be imbibed because they are structural. But when it comes to people will deliver all else. When we talk about governance and delivery and communication, that will all come out of people. So I think the most important, I would say the bottom of the pyramid is people, where everything sits, So top flight teams, really necessary. And is the CAE ready for personal transformation? I think that's the bottom line which you have come out, because if the CAE is ready for personal transformation, all other things will happen, and you'll have a good delivery, a good CAE, a good department, aspirations of the people being met, global delivery teams, etc. But I think the most important is the CAE ready for personal transformation? So proactive, positive influence and contribution by the function will certainly deliver. And of course, as you rightly said, the need to get connected to deliver to the society for bringing up the function, to bring something to the internal fraternity which is necessary. So I think really great presentation. Thank you very much for such a mature, great, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Deepji.
And thanks to Satish.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Deepji. Thank you, Satishji. It's
Very
my
nice.
pleasure. And I have thoroughly enjoyed the interaction and
Very
look
good.
forward.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.